Okay, hello. This is a course will be delivered to the third year student. It's comparative politics of the Middle East, and I know like this week is the first week of registration, so we can wait for 3 weeks or something until we know like how many students will be enrolled in this class. So in the meantime, I'll be recording all the lectures until everything will get settled. But anyone will like register in this class should know that all the lectures will be online, and your participation and your attendance, both of them like count to the final grade. So I assigned 5% of the total grades for participation and attendance. So we will have like online lectures. And we can have like more we can have it as like in more interactive way rather than recording and then uploading the lecture onto Moodle or Blackboard. So basically, I'll go through the course outline for you, and I'll give like a general overview about the colonial period and the post-independence period for today's lecture. So the course from its comparative politics of Latin America. So this is like basically, well, the main focus obviously is Latin America as like as an area study, and we will tackle different issues from comparative perspectives. So we can go through different theoretical insights and different empirical cases, and we can investigate how different theoretical frameworks or conceptual frameworks would yield insights and would help to increase the analytical leverage of some particular issues and topics and thematic topics in Latin America. So we basically cover different theoretical and empirical issues, and we almost cover all the Latin American countries. So we will go through like this historical developments in chronological order, and its implications for like regime type, state society relations, developmental models, and decision-making processes since like the post-independence period through the third wave of democratization and the enactment of neoliberal measures, and any like latest developments, for example, like the collapse of the institutional collapse of in Venezuela, for example, after Chavez. So the course is designed to cover different historical developments in Latin America, and it started out with the colonial period. Briefly, I'll pass over this colonial period and what was like the social or the composition of the societies back then, and how the struggle for independence came into being, and whether or not it shaped the post-independence or the state building processes in the post-independence period. So we'll like I'll gloss over this colonial period and the independence movement, and then how like the processes of state building in the region took shape, and what kind of regimes emerged out of after the as an outcome of these processes of state building, and how these regimes endured or changed over time, and how like the social and economic transformation as well had long run implications for state-society relation, for regime type, civil-military relations, how it actually shaped the interaction between different political actors, on the one hand, and between different political actors and social actors on the other. And then we will handle like the Latin America was like known for its like revolutionary inclination and foreign intervention, especially from the United States during the Cold War period, in order to contain the communist threat. So they had like a long history of insurgency groups and civil wars. So we need to look much deeper into the reasons of these revolutions, why some revolutions failed and other succeeded, and why some countries actually slipped into this prolonged civil wars, and how they put an end, they reached a political settlement in order to put an end to civil wars, especially in Central America. And then we will cover this broad theme of third wave of democratization and the enactment of market-oriented policies in the region since the 80s through 2000s. So these are the main themes that will be tackled from different theoretical perspectives and with different empirical cases. So for example, in civil wars, we will focus on Central American cases. With regime breakdown, we're going to focus mainly on Brazil and Chile. With bureaucratic authoritarianism, I'm going to explain shortly, we focus mainly on Argentina. So we have different countries with different focuses, but all in all, we are going to cover almost the entire region. So basically, we will start out with this overview on colonialism and efforts of the state building process and the politics of state building processes, and how the colonial period actually and the social interaction or the social composition and the social structure shaped by colonial authorities shaped the processes of state building in the region, and whether or not it did it had a legacy or it would account for this long-term outcome of state building. So we will focus on what the landscape and the social and political landscape had looked like before the Spanish and Portuguese authorities actually entered and invaded the New World or the region and established their own authority. And then we will focus on how the main parameters or the features of this colonial authority, basically politics, the politics of the colonial authority, whether or not the established well-elaborate bureaucratic and central administrative structure, and how the social composition and the social structure that had been shaped during this period had long-term ramification and implications for political dynamics and state-society relation. And what kind of economy the colonial authorities actually developed or managed to pull the region into the international market, and what kind of colonial economy emerged out of these authorities, and whether or not different social structures or those classes benefited from these colonial economic activities, accumulated power, and from this power and influence they shaped the political process after gaining independence from the colonial authorities. And what kind of a struggle for independence or the ideological content of this struggle for independence, and whether or not it affected the institutional configuration and the regime type after in the post-independence period. So basically it took unlike the Middle East, for example, it didn't take this radical struggle for independence or national liberation movements. It was basically conservative and preserved, for a long period of time, the same or the inherited social and political, social and economic structures inherited from the colonial period. And then we will focus on how the economic model or the intensification of economic activities or economic expansion gave rise to what's called the reformist movement. And this reformist movement actually focused on incorporating different popular sectors, mainly peasants and labor, into political dynamics, and the entire process shaped the political system and the party system, and subsequently the civil military relations, because the military establishment um, has been played important role in politics in Latin America, and it had like roots and legacy from the colonial and post-colonial period. So the second theme is we are gonna like go deep into this popular incorporation period, and it's and how the integration of the popular sector threatened the interest of the major or the powerful interest of conservative Black or conservative classes in Latin America, and this like how led to the social polarization between like the conservative class and the popular class or peasants movement, the peasants and labor movements, and this led to long period of instability, and it actually pulled the military into the political game, and to put an end to the existing regimes or the populist regimes, and to establish different kind of repressive and authoritarian regimes called bureaucratic authoritarianism. So we're going to focus on what bureaucratic authoritarianism is and how these regimes came into being, what kind of alliance or coalition the socioeconomic coalition of these bureaucratic regimes actually stabilized or destabilized these regimes over during the 60s and the 70s, and how like these bureaucratic authoritarian regimes collapsed or like gave way to another round of democratization or democratic return of democracy in Latin America. So by basically focusing on the ruling coalition, the socioeconomic foundation of these bureaucratic regimes, and what kind of conflict, the distributional conflict, and what kind of social and economic conflict emanated from preceding populist regime, and to what extent it persisted into or continued into this bureaucratic authoritarian period, and what kind of experience or institutional sediment left by this repressive military junta regime during that period. The third theme is like insurgency and revolution and civil wars, and basically how Latin America like exhibited different or diverse records in this regard. So why some social revolutions, basically in Cuba, the communist revolution or the socialism managed to like to have like to impose like their hegemonic power, and to take like to assume power and to grab power there, while other like peasant movements and similar movements in Central America, except for Sandinista in Nicaragua, as we're going to see, like failed to establish the same, to consolidate the same revolutionary regime. So why Latin America had different records with regard to revolutions and insurgency, and what actually would account for these different outcomes, like why some like revolutions managed to consolidate, to like occupy power center and to consolidate to gain like grip on power, and while others actually failed to recruit more supporters and to occupy power centers after all, and with some domestic and regional elements, some countries actually descended into civil wars with actually against the backdrop of the foreign policy in the United States, of the United States during the 60s and the 70s. So then we will go into this return of democracy period, because like before, like this bureaucratic authoritarian regimes actually got installed in the region, there had been some democratic populist regimes actually managed to strike roots in Latin America. But after like these kind of repressive, bureaucratic, authoritarian regime periods, so what happened was like with some kind of pressures from below and some engineering, some political and social engineering from above, basically in Brazil, the military actually withdrew, and the junta or the generals actually made their way back to the barracks, and they gave way to like they opened some space for negotiation between different political actors in order to reinstall and to reestablish democratic regimes. So during that period, so some old forces and old actors reasserted their power, while others or totally new actors came into being in order to run different countries. So how like this period or the legacy of the bureaucratic authoritarian regimes shaped the democratization process, and what kind of ruling coalition emerged from this return of democracy. And it was like coincidence between this return of democracy by giving way to democratic forces to reassert or to reestablish the regimes in Latin America, and the economic crisis during the 80s. So basically, it was like a dual process of economic transformation and political transformation, or political transition as well. So the same regimes actually had to face or were obliged to confront the hard economic crisis and economic recession by implementing new reform package and to follow the prescription of international financial institutions, basically what was called Washington Consensus, in order to open up or to implement this economic liberalization measures, and to and the state actually had to actually to decrease or to dwindle their role in, or the states actually had to scale back or troll back on their interventionist role or redistributive role in the region, that actually traced back to the populist era. And then how this interaction between the new political environment or the return of democracy or political democratization while implementing this neoliberal economic measures, how the interaction between different political and economic elements and factors reshaped the relationship between the state and society, reshaped the socioeconomic foundation of the ruling elites or the ruling class, and to what extent this would help sustain or subvert the new economic or the neoliberal economic policies, because it did have like it resonated with the economic policies or the new development model. It actually had implications and repercussions for different political interactions. It actually managed to relegate or to marginalize the popular sector, basically trade unions and peasants confederation. So actually it relegated these social forces that used to mobilize and used to pressure national governments in order to ask for more concessions and more benefits from its public policies. They actually were largely demobilized and largely relegated to the margin, and new actors, basically business associations and business people, like they became like the center, or they played important role in shaping the economic decision making and reshaping the ruling coalition in the region. So it had like implications for society. Demobilized some sectors and actually politicized and mobilized other sectors, and this had it had like some consequences for state-society relation and party system and different issues of representation and quality of democracy. And this is what we are going to move to in order to investigate in some detail. So basically, we are going to see how neoliberalism or the market-oriented measures or policies managed to reshape the party systems, while like these populist or old populist and traditional populist parties that used to mobilize popular sector, and they had this discourse of popular incorporation, they managed to reposition themselves programmatically in order to move a little bit to the right on the political spectrum. So this kind of party repositioning, it had different outcomes. So some political parties actually lost their old social bases or constituencies, while new parties actually came into being in order to represent like marginalized and disaffected social constituencies. And this had like important ramification or implication for the entire party system. So some old party systems actually totally collapsed in Bolivia and Venezuela, and to some extent in Ecuador, and slow erosion of already existing party systems, like what happened in Argentina with the total disappearance of old parties and the emergence of new parties, and in Uruguay, for example, the emergence of a new leftist party, the Frente Amplio. It actually reshaped the electoral competition, and they reshaped the political atmosphere and political environment and political competition there, putting an end to the monopoly of power between the old two traditional parties. So it actually, the implementation of these like neoliberalism and shifting away from this state-led growth model to like market economy model, it actually reshaped the relationship between state and society first, and second, it actually gave rise to new political actors that appealed to wide mass constituencies, whether by establishing new parties or actually mobilizing these disgruntled, masses or social constituencies from outside the political establishment, as we're going to see by the emergence of political outsiders. That they didn't have any political party, they actually they had like popular movement, and then transformed this popular movement into political party. And it actually, the return of democracy, this is one thing, but we need to assess the quality of this democracy, of this democratic, or the democratic regimes that actually got established or installed after the third wave of democratization. So we're gonna focus mainly on the representation question, and to what extent this these democratic regimes or democracy in Latin America really represents like wide mass constituencies. So we will tackle this issue by looking like into how political parties actually transformed their linkage to social bases. As I mentioned, it's pretty much related to reshaping party system as well. So to what extent these political parties reshaped or transformed their linkages to social basis, like based on a clear programmatic platform, or through like and like by offering more like more benefits to wide mass constituencies, like universal coverage of public policies, or they actually distributing the focus mainly on distributing material benefits to particular groups based on their patronage or clientelistic relationship with these parties. So universalistic provision of public goods, or particularistic provision of some public goods. And to what extent these new parties really represent or like really articulated different issues, or mobilized masses along different issue dimensions, and to what extent these new parties managed to reshape the political landscape. And in cases when, in some cases when, or like when the newly emerging parties or the traditional parties like collapsed, or the newly emerging parties fail to attract, wide mass constituencies, or to establish wide social basis, what kind of political alternative emerged, out of this situation, or out of this representative crisis, as the literature um, says. Um, so the representation question, from the representation question, we're going to focus on ethnicity as well, and to what extent like diverse ethnic groups um, manage to find an avenue uh, for like their own representation, or for venting out, their cumulative grievances. So how ethnic mobilization in several countries um, managed actually to impose, or to place, issues of representation and like social citizenship, basically, to place it, at the center of the political debates, and why some like indigenous and ethnic movements managed to translate, their or to capitalize on their organizational capacity and transform their movement into political parties, in order to have much more sustainable representation and much more sustainable admission to decision-making agency or decision-making bodies. And out of the representation question, one of the alternative, when political parties actually fail to represent the or to articulate, the demands of wide mass constituencies, this gave rise to a new like it was like totally it was like a return of like populist discourse, or the return of neo populism, with the advent of populist outsiders to the political domain. So actually, when like political parties or fail to re-establish, or to diversify their linkages to social bases in some countries, this for example, in Venezuela, like well-established political parties, the entirely collapsed, and this gave way to Chavez, for example, to endorse this populist discourse of Chavismo, and to have like this anti-establishment discourse, and to attract wide masses, and to absorb wide masses into his own discourse, putting an end to this well-established party system, basically the two old parties. And similar like events happened in Bolivia with Morales, and Ecuador with Correa. Other countries actually managed to witness, or actually only witnessed, this kind of emergence of social movements that only removed like the presidents, or pushed through the impeachment proceeding in the parliament, in order to overthrow, or order to topple the existing presidents, and to have like new elections. Mainly like Argentina, that it witnessed several rights, but the entire party system managed to rebalance again with the existence of the old Peronist party, managed to reach out to different, to reshape its own political alliance, and to reach out to non-traditional social constituency, that the actually non-core constituencies, they actually widened the social basis of the party, and they managed to preserve a kind of political equilibrium in Argentina. So like social movements and emergence of political outsiders, they have like different or diverse outcomes and diverse dynamics in the regions, while political outsiders manage to consolidate their powers in these countries. And in Paraguay, for example, the one political outsider, Fernando Logo, um, didn't manage, or he didn't have like the results was not that were not that successful if we compare, you know, his efforts to Morales or Morales in Bolivia, or Chavez in Venezuela. So what would account for this different political results, and what accounts for, like, you know, these kind of contentious practices of social movements, what would account for success or failure of these social movements, and what kind of repercussions and results, you know, these mobilization and political outsiders may have on the political dynamics and regime type. And again, we're going to focus on political violence and insurgency, but this time after the return of democracy, after the entire region, actually after the got kind of stable political regimes. So some like old forces or some old insurgency groups managed to persist, you know, over time, especially in Colombia. So what would account for this prolonged civil war? And we're going to tackle this issue from political economy perspective, and how the engagement or involvement or different parties, basically drug traffickers, that they benefited from the situation, or perpetuating, you know, this situation of civil war. It actually helped to continue, or to feed into this continuity of the struggle, or the armed struggle in Colombia. And then how like the post political settlements regimes, actually they had different dynamics in El Salvador and Guatemala. Both witnessed, you know, prolonged and brutal civil wars. But why some political actors, or the political actors that they were involved in the civil war in Salvador, they actually had different political outlook, and they established totally different dynamics from that had like implication or repercussion for establishing or consolidating a democratic regime there, while it's not the case in Guatemala. So we need to tease out, you know, the similarities and differences between the two cases in order to see what kind of variables would offer plausible account for these diverse outcomes. And we focus on some insurgency and armed groups in Mexico called Zapatistas, and how they had different political discourse, and basically different ideational foundation of democracy, social justice, and political participation, and whether or not, you know, these kind of armed and insurgency groups be offered in like a viable alternative to the existing liberal paradigm of democracy and political participation. And we finally end with the issue, or like it's a very broad issue or topic of development and democracy, whether or not they have to, like, you know, they go together, what kind of correlation, you know, the like economic developments and political democracy, whether or not there is kind of self reinforcement like relationship between both of them, or you can have only one side, and like you can have like democratic regimes while poor economic development trackers, or the vice versa. And how we can place, you know, this social question within this democratic, liberal democratic paradigm. And we address, you know, this question by focusing mainly on Brazil, and the mainly the Labour Party with the with Lula da Silva reaching power in Brazil, and how the Labour Party actually changed its political discourse, and how the public policies of the party actually changed from or how the position actually of the Labour Party changed from like the opposition to the governing party, how this kind of a changing the positionality of the party from the opposition to the ruling party, it actually tuned out, you know, some social issues, and the political platform, and actually pushed, you know, leader or the political leaders to have a compromise with the rightist forces or non-leftist forces. So how like the Labour Party tackled this social question after reaching power, and to what extent the discourse or the translation of this discourse into actual public policies it actually fit the discourse of the left or of the Labour Party before reaching power. And we focus again on like one of the we focus on the relationship between like institutions and political institutions and resource endowment in oil-rich country in Venezuela, basically. And we focus from, we tackle this issue from macro and macro structural perspective and micro foundational perspective, and how like citizens perception and some institutional configuration interact in order to account for or in order to bear on this subject, how like the resources or this kind of rentier economy affected, you know, the endurance or the decay of political institutions in Venezuela. And then finally, like how again, like Latin America, you know, has always been integrated into a global market, but how this time we're going to see how this integration into global market after the enactment of neoliberal policies and the establishment, or after like the multinational corporations actually gained hold in Latin America, it affected the structure of labor market there, and again, like the public policies or economic the degree of autonomy of economic decision making there. We will cover. We are going to, as I said before, your participation matters. And we are going to have like you're going to present your term paper. I'm going shortly through your coursework, but here we're going to have like simulation model basically on the issue of populism and whether or not the political outsiders, that the people that campaigned on anti-establishment platform, when they reached power, whether or not they actually and effectively offered an alternative, a viable alternative to liberal democratic paradigm that basically focused on electoral dynamics and accountability through electoral channels, and to what extent we can integrate, you know, social dimension or social citizenship into the definition of democracy, and whether or not there is a trade-off between political rights and political freedom on the one hand, and social rights and social citizenship on the other. So was it the main? So what's the main outcomes of this course? So first, this would increase your analytical skills. So bearing on different topics, or like having different like theoretical perspectives, and how how different, you know, empirical cases or empirical issues would fit into these theoretical and conceptual frameworks. This would increase your critical way of thinking and your analytical skills as well. So whether or not like how can you choose, you know, between different theoretical frameworks in order to bear on different subjects? How can you link between theories or different theoretical frameworks and empirical issues or empirical cases? And again, you're going to submit, you know, some like term paper, your term papers and reaction papers as well. So you will acquire, you know, this skill of how to write, how to develop your own argument, and how to write argumentatively. And then with the class presentation, you will like enhance your oral presentation skills. So here is this is like your the breakdowns of your coursework. So you will submit like 2 movie reviews. The first one, it's documentary about the Pinochet period in Chile, and the other one about the military regime in Argentina, La Historia Oficial, the official story. And both account for 10% of the total grade. And then you have your reaction paper. So reaction paper, so you have to do like the week 8 readings beforehand. So you have to read this in advance before I deliver the lecture. So in week 10, you will have like you have to read, you know, all the week 8 readings on social movements and political outsiders. And then you have you need to synthesize the material and submit your reaction paper in week 10, week 8 before I deliver these lectures, the lectures of week 8. For the word length and more instructions will be posted on Moodle closer to the date. And then you will have like the term paper. So you are totally free to choose any topic listed in your course outline, and then you have to come up with a research puzzle, and you have to write your research paper in order to answer the question you pose. And then a simulation model and class presentation, both like account for 10%, 5% each. And then the final exam, I'm not sure if we are going to have it like, you know, in-class exam, or I'm perfectly fine with take-home exam if it would be like, you know, some sort of difficulties to have like, you know, in-class exam. So we're gonna like, I'll give you like a general overview on the colonial period and what was like, what about the social and political landscape before the colonial authority, before like the colonial powers established their own authorities in Latin America. So basically, before the discovery of the New World, they had like so many like indigenous groups or Indian groups, like they had lived in the entire region before the colonial period or before the occupation. So the most prominent ones are the Mayan, Aztec, and Incans. So the Mayan groups actually they had been based in Mexico and part of nowadays Guatemala, and they persisted from roughly the 10th through the 16th century. And they had so many like, you know, cultural, they had built their own civilization, and they had many cultural achievements, from like, you know, having like, you know, architecture, paintings or whatever. So they had established their own civilization throughout like over like nearly 6 centuries, until actually they had fallen like victim of different invasion, basically Toltec invasion and some tribal race that put an end to this civilization and gave way to another civilization that was like the Aztec civilization. So it became like the dominant or the most powerful civilization in the center, basically in Mexico. So the Aztec Empire, they established their own empire. They had been known for their constant engagement in wars, because they had their own religious beliefs that they had. These beliefs actually had been based on this very notion of sacrifice, and by like, you know, sacrificing, like they had to to launch several wars against different tribes and to expand their territorial domain. So they did actually establish their own powerful empire in the 12th and 13th century. And the empire had been based on social stratification. So they had like, the upper classes or kind of the nobility, and then they had like slaves, on the bottom. So nobility at the very top and then slaves on the bottom. And they had like this based on this stratification, they had different social differentiation as well, with some like, the slaves, they did like, uh, some sort of so the like people on the people at the top, or the nobles, the actually they had owned the lands, because they had this attachment to communal lands, and they had to and slaves, had to be forced into and repressively forced into labor work. And then Incans, the actually they had been located along this coast. You see like the gray area. So basically from Ecuador all the way down to Chile. And Peru actually was like the Cusco region or valley was the center of their civilization, and it actually continued from the 15th century through the middle of the 16th century. So it had like the established their own civilization. But the most like important feature of this civilization was the establishment of a strong or well elaborate hierarchical bureaucracy, that they had like some the rulers at the top, and some officials, on the bottom. And by establishing this hierarchical structure, administrative structure, they managed to establish their strong authority, or to command strong authority over the Andes region, roughly speaking. So that was like there had been so many other civilizations, but they're like these three had been like the most prominent ones. And like the colonial authorities had to, especially like Spanish, because like the Brazil, didn't have pretty much or strong presence of civilization before the Portuguese actually established their own authority there. So actually these groups had been like the most important or the most prominent empires or civilizations in the region, and the Spanish colonial authority had to eradicate them altogether in order to consolidate the colonial authority over Latin America. So what was like the context of these kind of colonial roots and the colonizing, the entire Latin America in the 15th through the 19th century? So basically, like some European powers, they have been known for their skills for navigation. So Columbus actually had like several journeys, in order to discover, and he discovered, this new world. So he had like he had traveled, through the region between 1492 1504, so in actually the early 16th century. So that was, or that happened actually against the backdrop of power dynamics between different powerful classes in Spain, between like different like nobility, basically like the landowners or nobility and the crown, and as well between different European powers, the struggle or the rivalry between different European powers as well. So the intention basically came, from the Spanish crown and the Spanish nobility. It was like a mixture between religious and economic motivations. So first of all, it was a mix of economic and religious motives, because the crown actually had sought some new sources of revenues in order to consolidate his own power and to expand, the territorial domain, and to cope up with this kind of fierce competition with other European powers. In the meantime, it was like the nobility or the landowners, they actually needed to accumulate more wealth, and that's why the crown and the nobility, they had like converged interest in order to he had the interest in directing, his subjects overseas, and they had like by like moving to the Spanish America, so they had a chance for social mobility and for more chances for wealth accumulation. So that was like the economic part, and it has like the religious part as well. It was like the period of like a religious rule, and they had this endorsement of some like the Society of Jesus inside the Catholic Church. They had this belief in messianic mission in order to convert people to the true religion. So in order to missionaries, actually they had like by moving there, they had chance to convert, Indians or indigenous people to Catholicism. Um, so like they had like some sort of military power. So the Spanish authority, they occupied almost the entire region except, the eastern part, namely, or roughly speaking, Brazil. So they eradicated the Aztec and Incas in Mexico by 1521 and in Peru 1533. So by like roughly the first quarter of 16th century, the Spanish authority, the Spanish colonial power, managed to establish its entire or to consolidate its authority over the region and eliminate any existence of pre-civilizational empires or groups. This actually changed the social composition in Latin America, because white men actually outnumbered white females. So they actually had to get married to some indigenous females, and this gave rise to mixed blood class, or what was called mestizos. So in order to distinguish between like the white race and the mixed blood race. And they were interested, unlike Portuguese authority. So the Spanish authority, the colonial authority, they had been interested in establishing well elaborate and strong bureaucratic structure. So this happened actually through vice realities, by establishing like these kind of authorities that had been like directly like connected or directly represented the crown in Spanish America, and they were, or they have been responsible directly to the Spanish crown. And then like the authority was like the authority of the church had been one of the most like important authority during that period, in order to legitimize this divine rule of the monarchical role. He actually, the crown represented God, so he had to like what he said was kind of some sort of similar to the word of God. So that's why he had this legitimacy to be in order to conform to his rules or his decisions. So they actually claimed, this religious authority. So that was like the map. As I said, we are more or less, you are going to cover almost all the entire region, almost all the countries, but from like different perspectives, or from different with different topics, or with different focuses. But we're going to focus mainly on the entire region. And this is like the black and white map represented, the colonial period, and the light gray areas like represented, the vice realities of the Spanish authority, and the dark one, the dark gray one, this is the Portuguese authority, mainly in Brazil. So what kind of economic activities the colonial authorities managed to engage in, or to actually to flourish or to nourish there, and how these economic activities led the social and the economic transformation in Latin America, and it persisted through the post-colonial period. So basically, because they had been motivated by accumulating wealth, so it was like a rich region of mineral resources, basically the gold and silver. So mining activities had played important role. Our like the main priority had been vested in this mining activities, and control the colonial authorities, actually they had been interested in controlling ports, and to have like the total control over trade pathways. So that's why the main like economic activities were like the mining one, and commerce, or establishing like commercial centers and having control over trade through like issuing different sort of legislations or regulations that would regulate and arrange trade activities, like imposing tariffs in order to prevent like smuggling activities or whatever. So that's why you establish control over trade by imposing tariffs and increase your own revenues as a crown or vice reality, and by mining activity as well, like the Spanish authority or realities. And as we're going to see, mixed blood class managed to accumulate wealth. Colonial authorities, they had not been interested in agricultural sector, with few exceptions. Like they did care mainly about some agricultural goods that would be used in for export, or for as an input in manufacturing industries. So the main source of labor had been Indians, and it was like, as I mentioned, they continued with this stratified social structure. So they had been interested in Indians as like a source of basically like to perpetuate or to consolidate the serfdom system by mainly working as like slaves in mining sectors or in agricultural lands. So by changing, this composition of social structure, like mestizos and white men that were born in Spain, and white men that they were born in Spanish America, they changed like the social makeup of the region, and actually they ran short of Indian labor because of this coercive and repressive labor or slavery system. The actually Indians eventually had become like victims of several diseases and high mortality rates. So that's why and with the expansion of economic activities as well, so they had to resort to different labor market, or to import laborers in order to sustain their economic activities. So that's why they had to import black slaves from Africa in order to be a source of labor and to continue with their economic activities. And this added another layer to the multiracial composition of Latin American societies. Now we have like Europeans, and then Black Africans, and then the indigenous population. And even within the white race or within the Europeans, they made this distinction or stratification between white men and mixed blood. So the white men, like the white man and white woman, that actually they got married and they had like kind of pure race, and then the white men got married to indigenous or Indian or black woman, and then they had like mixed blood race. And then within the same category of the white race, they had like the distinction between peninsulares and criollos. So peninsulares, they had like they were born in Spain, and the white men and white women that they were born in Spain, and then criollos or creoles. They were born in Spanish America. So they has created this system of social stratification, and this system of social stratification indeed actually it persisted over time, or even in the post-independence period. So besides this multiracial society, there had been some enclaves or some sort of centers of power inside Latin American societies. The church like remained to play important role in the region in order to legitimize the viceroyalties or the Spanish crown's role throughout the region, and the army, the military as well, in order to defend the territories from tribal raids on the one hand, and from rival or forces from Europe, basically the Dutch and the British. And merchants and sheep farmers, they actually established their own power, and they benefited from agricultural activities and like trade activities in the region, with the integration into this colonial economy. So they accumulated political power, and they accumulated their economic power and some sort of wealth to keep. And then so the struggle, as I mentioned, this distinction or this stratification even between the white race, mainly I would single out, this struggle between peninsulares and criollos, the struggle between these like those who were born in Spain and those who were born in Spanish America. This actually shaped the post-independence period, because criollos, they actually they had grown angry because they accumulated some sort of economic power, on they had their own economic resources that they needed to translate these economic power into political power. And still peninsulares had monopolized the all of the political top positions. So that's why they needed to get some sort of political power, that these kind of different political positions and top ranking political positions had been reserved for peninsulares. So the actually mestizos and criollos, they had their own like economic sources of economic power, basically from land ownership, haciendas, or like they formed their kind of isolated fiefdom by by owning their own lands. And the titles actually had been like they had the right to pass it on, the title of the as a landowner. They were allowed to pass it on to their sons. So it was like kind of hereditary title. So they formed kind of autonomous rural community with some economic power bases. And then they needed to translate this into political power on the national level. So they had some sort of limited political influence, and their political authority had remained limited to regional and local levels. So they had been responsible for some local councils or town councils, that these councils had been given the authority to collect taxes. So they had some sort of political authority, but it remained kind of constrained and limited to this regional and and local level. So they needed to take it to the national level in order to occupy some top political position. So that was for Spanish America. For the Portuguese America, so the Spain and Portugal, they had this treaty of Tordesillas in the late 15th century in order to divide up the region between them. So the Portuguese authority, or the Portuguese court, they were or they have been awarded actually this eastern half of South America, mainly this kind of the Brazil. If you, let's go back to the map. So here you have like the dark one. So basically it's nowadays like some sort of like, they had like parts of Uruguay and Paraguay and Brazil as well, before like demarcating the boundaries as we know today. So by having like, or establishing authority over, or mainly monarchy in the early or at the turn of the 16th century, so the Portuguese authority easily, it was much more easier to establish their own, or to consolidate their own power over like the eastern half of the continent by the 16th century, for several reasons. First of all, like this area, the like Brazil, that they didn't have, like the eastern part, they didn't have this well-established, mighty or powerful native civilization as Aztec, for example, or in Mexico. So the only the largest language group, the language group was Tupi Guarani. It actually located in along like the coast of Brazil, and some parts in Paraguay, and some in Venezuela, as we know today. So the actually was like, that was like the indigenous group, you know, this region had during that period. And the region was relatively poor. They didn't have like the same mineral resources or wealth of gold and silver as Spanish America. So the only economic activity the Portuguese authority that had been interested, or like became interested in, was like a cane sugar cultivation. So they have paid much more attention to the agricultural sector before the discovery of the gold and diamond later in the 18th century. But mainly they had invested heavily in this agricultural sector, especially in cane sugar cultivation. And they had never been interested in establishing this effective or extensive or vast bureaucratic apparatus until like after 5 decades of establishing their monarchical authority there. Except for some areas, you know, along Atlantic coast, in order to arrange or organize tax collections and export activities, and then in order to organize the large land donation as well, in order to create, you know, a class of loyal personnel, or loyal authority to the Portuguese authority. So they had to distribute so many or to grant, you know, so many lands in order to have like to establish their own property class that had been loyal to the crown authority. And then same thing like happened here as well. So it was kind of shortage in like indigenous labor force. So that's why the Portuguese authority, they had to resort to different labor market. So they had to import, some slaves, especially from their colonies in Africa. So they had to import, African slaves in order to work in. But by focusing on this agriculture, sugar, like cane sugar industry, cane sugar cultivation, this actually feed it back into industrial activities as well, like sugar processing or whatever. So the sugar industry flourished during that period, and it needed more labor force. So that's why they had to import some black slaves from Africa to force them into labor in industrial sector. Except for this short period of invasion of the Dutch authority that actually controlled over the sugar-rich northern area, or the northeastern parts of Brazil, from 1624 till 1654. It was like an alliance between like different landowners, planters, and like some military forces. They managed to force them back into the ocean by the mid 17th century. So except for this period, like Portugal or the Portuguese colonial authority had full control over the eastern part of South America. As for that was like the northeastern parts. For the central and southern parts, this region had been inhabited mainly by like these kind of indigenous and language groups. So the colonial authority, or the Portuguese authority, they actually they used this kind of slave raids in order to eliminate or to abolish the existence of the existence of indigenous people in these areas. And then they got like the colonial authority, they got kind of penetration to the central and southern parts of the region. And as I mentioned, like it was until the late 17th century and then mid 19th century, some mineral resources had been discovered, and this enabled some sort of industrial and mineral activities in Brazil. But the situation in Brazil, like this social stratification and this multiracial composition of society had been much more severe than than Spanish America, as I'm going to show you a table shortly, because of the black people or like the black actually slaves back then. They did account they did account for roughly like the 50% of the entire society, and they had the same like stratification between Brazilian born landowners and Portuguese born land, or something like Corias and Peninsulares. So it replicated itself here as well, but between like within like this class of landowners. So here you have like the Spanish America. So by 19th century, like the indigenous still like they had like the composition, the indigenous people account for roughly 42% of the entire population, and blacks only 12%, and mixed blood 28, and 18 like the pure white race. In Portuguese America, like on the contrary, so they have like you see here the black people the entire society actually had been based on blacks. It's roughly 49.8%, and then the whites only 23, and 17 or roughly 18% mixed blood. So how the independence movement actually came into being? So it was given, this social stratification structure, and given, this social composition between different classes, and the division or the dividing line between different racial forces. So the post or the independence movement actually emerged from this conservative environment, and the main target was just like putting into this occupation or to the colonial authority, while preserving the same social, same conservative social order, in order to maintain, their wealth and their social position. Um, I'm not sure if I can go rapidly through this. Um, so basically, like the emergence or the strength of this independence movements resonated, or it had gone in tandem with some developments in Spain. So while some sort of political and administrative reforms taken by the Spanish crown, it affected, the degree of autonomy of different races or different social classes, that eventually created, this sort of patriotic Creoles or patriotic army to lead the national liberation or the independence movement. So what happened in the early 18th century, it was like the crown in Spain tried to take some important far-reaching political reform measures in order to resist the Spanish decline. So the far-reaching like administrative and political reforms led to some devolution of power in order to increase, the revenues for the crown in Spain as well. So by creating these kind of vice realities in New Granada, basically in Colombia and Venezuela, the area we know now, and Buenos Aires and Argentina. So by creating, these kind of councils or vice realities and these kind of positions, this gave some sort of a space for local governors, basically from Creoles, to take on, these new roles, and as local governors and local courts as well. It opened, some space for Creoles to take some positions. So the crown actually reversed, some of these reforms by the early 19th century. But again, the Creoles retained their own control over town councils and taxation system. So they had like important regional and local bases of power. And the crown as well tightened its control over the church by totally the expulsion of the Jesus Society, and the most powerful like faction in the Catholic hierarchy, by undermining and eroding their power bases. The crown actually neutralized the church and tightened its control over the church as well. And then the military had been the only avenue for mestizos and Creoles to practice or to gain some sort of political influence. It was like the only space available for them in order to get some sort of political authority. So by even like tightening control over the military, by having these kind of races and forces inside the military, it did it backfired actually, and it had like, it reversed, these kind of measures to tighten control over different power centers in Spanish America. Moreover, like these kind of or in addition to this kind of controlling measures or far-reaching political and administrative reform measures, the crown actually issued, this decree of free trade in order to increase economic resources by imposing more tariffs on free trade. So like some trade centers, they had like now, they had been completely free to have a direct kind of commercial relation with Spanish centers, or any with Spain, directly, without having any sort of legal regulations or any sort of obstacles that would preclude this free exchange of goods. But this actually backfired because of Creoles actually dominated the military, and by creating like trade centers that actually accumulated wealth, and they had like invested interest in perpetuating, you know, their powerful economic position, it eventually reversed, you know, the power position of the crown in Spain. So this actually laid the ground for the groundwork for the patriotic army in order to fight for independence. So the situations or the political developments in Spain, it actually affected, you know, this independence movement in Spanish America as well. So what happened in the early 19th century? So Napoleon Bonaparte actually tried to expand his power, the French power, and actually the French authority occupied Madrid in the early in 1808. So and then forced the crown, you know, out of throne, and actually his brother took over. So what happened in Latin America? Viceroyalties, they actually rejected to concede to the new crown because they claimed that they had the only they had been only responsible only for, or accountable only the crown. They derive their authority from the Spanish crown, and that's why they refused to abide by the French authority, the rule of the French authority. And then they developed, you know, this notion of the sovereignty of people. Now they didn't have a crown, a Spanish crown, so that's why the sovereignty returned to the people in Spanish America. So that this actually empowered or gave like a boost to town councils and trade centers to expand their authority over people in Spanish America. And from in 2 years, actually, the pattern took shape from basically from wealth Creoles that actually took the lead, mainly from Simon Bolivar in Venezuela, in Caracas. And he actually led, you know, these efforts of the independence movement. He actually visited or like lived in Europe for some time, and he was deeply affected by this Enlightenment idea. And he had this dream of unifying, you know, the whole Latin American region, to have like a confederation of Latin American viceroyalties or post-colonial or liberated kind of region unified in one federation. So he actually, because of the French authority gained much more power over Spanish crown, and actually the French authority forced, you know, the Spanish authority there back then to endorse a liberal constitution in 1811. So that's why it gave impression that, you know, the Spanish authority actually started to collapse or to unravel gradually, and this gave much more space for Creoles to gain much more powerful or autonomous position over Spanish America. So he taking advantage of these events in Spain. So Bolivar actually took advantage of this of these events, and the Congress actually convened in Venezuela in 1811 and made, you know, this declaration of independence. So what was going on in Spain back then? Like after the French occupation, some junta in Sevilla, they refused actually to concede or to succumb to the French authority or to Napoleon power, and they actually governed the city or in the Crown Ferdinand's name. And they actually proved some sort of resilience, and they managed to bring, you know, the crown back to the throne in 1814. So by proving resilience and by returning, you know, the by like returning the returning of the Spanish crown to the throne in 1814, he managed to the Spanish authority or the colonial authority and royalists, they managed to crush the rebellion or the rebellious movements led by Creoles during that period. And Bolivar was forced into exile in New Granada and then to Jamaica. Okay, so I leave it there. And next time I'm gonna talk more about the independence movement and how actually what happened in Mexico and how Bolivar managed to make some sort of comeback, and he managed to liberate some countries and Latin America gained independence, and how like this colonial period shaped the post-independence the processes of state building and the post-independence political regime. Okay, bye.